Welcome back to the Dream Together podcast. It's so great to have everyone. We are talking about the conversation of the church and the city, but we're trying to do a deep dive, talking about family, talking about leadership, and today we're talking about finances. Let's jump into it. We got Scotia Moore, Lee Rowland, John Mark Hart. We're here together to dig down into a topic that I believe affects everybody, but sometimes we just don't have the opportunity to talk about some of these things, and that's finances. You know, for some people, they're like, when the wind blows, my wallet feels like a kite, right? Gas prices are going up, and I remember the eggs stood out to me when the inflation really started to hit. I would go to Walmart and there were these big cases of 5 dozen eggs. And I just felt good about myself when I come home and be like, Alicia, I'm bringing home 5 dozen eggs. Wow. And they were like $9. Mm-hmm. Inflation hits, they were between 22 and 28 bucks. Mm-hmm. Needless to say, we began to find other sources of food to eat during the week.
Yeah.
Beans
and rice, they go a long way, don't they?
They sure do.
There's a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to finances, but money is a stressor. Even if you want to change the whole world, it challenges us in several ways. You know, when we first even started doing Stronger Together, our family was under a lot of pressure because I could not get life insurance because of my physical condition. And so that was a hidden stress. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, we are just jumping into a new venture. So funds were not high at all. And it was like the account was going the wrong direction. I want to have a nice open conversation, one, to say that these are real challenges that an individual, that families face today. And I think like right now, because of inflation and because of where society is, a lot of people are wrestling with it. How do we solve the poverty problem? And how should we be looking at money? Who would like to jump in for John Mark? I'm going to toss this one to you because I feel like we need to start really high. We talked in the hallway just a little bit about some of this, but let's kind of frame this because all of us are going to wrestle with this. If you want to make a difference, cash comes in at some point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll take your second question first. How should we think about money? You know, in the scripture, since we're talking about the church right now, there's a lot of warnings about money, loving money, being greedy. Jesus says you can't serve God and mammon, can't serve 2 masters. There's also a lot of wisdom about how to use money and talking about money can be a blessing and being generous towards others. If it was all bad, why would we give it to people? You know. Right. And so how do you hold all that together? And if we try to summarize it, I think a general framework is money can be a very powerful servant and is a very cruel master. Or money can be a very powerful tool, but is a terrible God. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it in that way as a tool, you need to know how to use a tool, but you also need to know why. What are you supposed to use it for? So, you know, a scalpel can be used to save a life or to take a life. If I'm got a paintbrush, I can vandalize down the street, or I can paint the Sistine Chapel, you know. And so just thinking about our responsibility in the church to teach people this is an important tool. Don't live for it. Live for something bigger and better than money. But learn how to use it wisely. And there's all sorts of things there about, you know, how do I make a budget and savings account and investing, you know, just practical wisdom that we need to disciple people. And particularly, you know, if you're doing ministry as I am in an under-resourced community, then often people have just been surviving for generations and it's hard. And so we want to help, but people need discipleship and some tools of how to use this tool.
No, that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. I want to say that because even for where our church is planted right next to a community of need, and that's a great point. And even if we don't talk more about this very point, if we're saying, hey, we want that discipleship is holistic, and I do want to connect that term to it being holistic, we will see results in family relationships. We will see someone grow in confidence. We will see someone lifting their heads. We will see someone smiling more. There are things that you'll be able to see, but one of them not to overlook is to talk about money in the church is wrong. That there's generational poverty. There's this cycle in relationships, a lot of times in poverty, where it's let's take turns being broke and let's do the crab thing. If anybody's crawling out of the pot, it's not intentional perhaps, but hey, who do you think you are? What are you doing here? So and you use the language discipling, but I know that some of our audience may not even be Christians. What we're saying is teaching someone a better way, mentoring a better way to do these things. And I love how you did not skip the fact that if someone's coming out of poverty, it's not, should they have a conversation around finances, it's almost a guarantee that there's got to be a place where you're trained to rethink when it comes to money. Go ahead, John Mark.
Well, the last little thing I'll throw in there to your first question, how do we solve the poverty problem? I'm not going to answer the question, but I may just throw in there, what is the poverty problem? And,
Thank you.
And as we think about this, I like Dorothy Day's statement, a good society is one that makes it easy for people to be good. And in America, we have an urban poverty problem that makes it really hard for people to thrive and reach their God-given potential, where the pressures it puts on families. Sometimes we talk about, broken family is the root of generational poverty, but often generational poverty is what keeps breaking families as well. It goes both ways. The pressure it puts on families, what it does in terms of educational opportunities. And we know, Lee knows better than any of us, all the statistics, all the data on if you haven't had good educational opportunities by the time you're 7, 8 years old, all the outcomes for life that are connected to that. So it's if we have a poverty situation in which it makes it hard for people to reach their God-given potential, that's a problem. At the same time, being wealthy can be a temptation that makes it hard to be good. So we want to create a society and a community that for people from a lot of different backgrounds is giving people an opportunity to thrive, to be good, to reach their God-given potential, to live for something bigger than themselves. So
I need to rewind. And for everyone listening, rewind is referring to cassette tapes that we used to have.
We used to have them right after 8 tracks.
That's right after 8 tracks. Stick with a pencil in there and you could rewind that thing manually. If your batteries ran out in your Walkman, I know you all wanted to know that. You said, let me ask another question on top of the question we posed, which was, we said, how do we solve the poverty problem? You said, what is the poverty problem? I think that was gold, but I want you to unpack what you just did by asking that question, because I think that if I'm following what you were going after, that's a big topic to discuss. Why did you shift that question? And
I just want to think deep. I want to think deeply about what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a flourishing human? And if we have people that are not able to have healthy food and a safe home to live in and access to a good education and good work, that's a problem that is hindering. But we could start talking about how to solve that problem as if everyone had more money, everything would be great. But we know there's a reality. There's a whole lot of people with a lot of money that are not thriving. And so we need to think deeply about that reality. And I think since we are talking about the church in this little series, the church is an opportunity that can bring people is a space where there's an opportunity to bring people together, middle class, wealthy, poor, and teach us how to love each other and how to help each other and how to learn from each other. The early church in the book of Acts did that in some really powerful ways that are still countercultural today. And we have an opportunity to learn from that and think about that.
Well, okay. So we're the two pastors sitting here, and yeah, I think this is true of your church and the church we're blessed to be a part of here. That we have multi-ethnic and multi-class. So we have the unhoused who are comfortably part of the family and working to get out of these situations, sitting next to people who have generational wealth. And what I love about that is that's only Christ who can jump in and do that. But you circling this point about what is poverty is something that I would love to discuss, because if we're saying money solves everything, we need to talk about that. If that's a prevailing message where we're thinking if we can just drive the right finances to the right communities, now let's talk through that just a little bit, because what if that's my number one aim and I finally get person A with all of this money and I've spent all this time and I've directed all these resources there? What I'm hearing is that may not solve poverty.
Yeah, I think you don't have to spend a ton of time if you spend honest time with people who have financial wealth, because that's just one type of wealth, to see that there is pain there, there is lack. It might not be in the dollars and cents, but there's loss, there's grief. Money doesn't solve all of life's problems. It doesn't. In fact, it enhances many of the relational ones. So, so I don't think that viewing, this dream of wealth and riches, etc., as the end destination is a wise one. I think you get there. If you get there, you could spend a whole life chasing that and not accomplish it. But if you are able to accomplish it, you will still have lack in some areas. And so when you talk about holistic, and John Mark will say redemptive engagement, I think the idea of having a redemptive view of finances is really important. It's another book that I want John Mark to write. I've got all these books for somebody else to write. But I think it's important for us to I think the shift of the question to what is poverty brings in a broader scope of ways that we can define it. That it's not just lacking financial means. It can be lacking in any area, and you can accomplish the financial stuff and still be lacking in some of these other things and be, just as broken. So you might not be broke,
right?
But you can still be broken.
Well, now access, and this is what I observed really when we were giving a lot of time just to say, how does a city transform? How can we change all of this? This is what I will say. What we're not communicating here is the idea that money is absolutely irrelevant.
No.
Not saying that at all.
And we see people living in abject poverty. Our hearts break for that, and we want to see change where people are not stuck in cycles of poverty that make it hard for them to reach their God-given potential. We just want to say that within a broader.
Well, make it hard for them. I want to give an example. You have one individual who has a certain amount of wealth. Doesn't have to be multimillionaire, but when they need to take a break, they can go somewhere. When they need to go to the doctor, they can get to the doctor. They have medical insurance, and they have access to resources. That lightens the load that I can get somewhere where I can get help faster and easier. When someone does not have finances, and maybe there isn't even a doctor in the community or a dentist in the community, there's just some very practical things that you lose. Your health in the whole community is lower. Your life expectancy in the community is lower. And so there are some things that you can directly tie to net income in a community based on the expense of life. So I just wanted to kind of lay that down. I won't even do another practical one.
Yeah.
I don't know why this one keeps coming to mind, but I'm like, wow, a person who wants to get her nails done, get her hair done, look nice, or a young man who wants to show up and get a job opportunity and has a selection in his closet and can present himself well, versus someone who can't afford to even maintain their self-care.
Right.
Is at some level of a disadvantage.
For sure.
So we just want to say we're examining this conversation.
Yeah.
A
And
little
the
bit
practical
deeper.
side of it, like, I wouldn't want the listeners to be like, look, my lights are off. And,
Right.
I don't know what you guys are up there talking about, but because our topic is finances. So we are talking specifically about financial poverty or the challenges in that area. Because, I mean, certainly, and for me, I live in the world. I'm a mom, I'm a business owner, but I live in the practical world of keeping those books straight at home and in my business, and the realities of the gas prices and the grocery prices in a house with as many people as I live with. It's an everyday reality. Like, the way that, you're tightening the belt and tightening the belt and tightening the belt. And then coming from a background where there were tons of financial challenges, single parent home, I've experienced hunger, I've been couch homeless. So, it's not philosophical. It is like, has been lived and is still being lived.
No one would expect that if they ran into you, by the way.
They wouldn't. And we don't know what anyone else has gone through when we run into them. And so that's why we have to take the time to listen to stories, people's stories. But at the same time, there's this scripture that comes to mind. And I know that not every one of our listeners, come from this background, but I wanted to share it because I think it's very relevant to how I don't know how to solve the poverty problem. I don't have, a systemic solution for all those things. It's multifaceted and it's varied. But there, one thing that it says in 2 Corinthians 8:13 says, "Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but there might be equality." And then it goes on to say, "Those who gather much don't have too much. Those who gather little don't have too little." And so there's this concept that there is some level of equality, which is going to freak people out. Because I know when you start talking about money, a lot of fear is poked at.
No, I hear someone listening time. I knew it.
She's
the
a
whole time.
socialist.
Socialist, communism. I knew it was coming.
Right,
Sooner or later,
right,
we're going to
right.
talk about these economic systems.
Yes.
I do want us to remind me, John Mark, to get our hallway conversation back on this table, just to philosophically talk about, communism, socialism, and a new one that you introduced to us that
Right.
existed before capitalism, which is what we know here in America.
Right. But just this concept that those who gather much, they're not overwhelmed by their much. Yeah. And those who gather a little, they're not underwhelmed by their little, but we're getting what we need. And I think when we're talking about finances and we're really talking about, can we have a baseline of being able to live in a way where your needs are met? Like, there are plenty of our neighbors who we say that we love and who we're striving to love better, who just don't have basic needs met. Mm-hmm. They can't age with dignity. They're looking forward after, a life of raising their kids and struggling to poverty or to being in situations where their dignity is challenged. So just those practical, basic aspects of how do we think rightly about finances. I think we start with a baseline of everyone having what they need. And what does it take to get there? And how do we love our neighbors so that happens?
No, Scotia, we don't start with what we need because, see, you got broke and it was your fault.
Because you're irresponsible
or
sinful.
But I want to bring up some of those points, but I think when we start having these conversations about money, before we bring up like one point like that's more the bootstraps idea, I don't want a bunch of darts thrown at it. Because it's biblical to have personal responsibility.
Yeah,
it's biblical to say, hey, let him that stole steal no more. But, work willingly with your hands so you can give to others. So, yeah, we want everyone to get to the point where they can. But I also want to invite our listeners that regardless, let's just say this. If you're an American, you probably have a left-wing or a right-wing position. The right-wing position is more bootstraps and the left-wing position is more compassion. It's more, are you loving? Are you compassionate? Are you sharing your wealth? And all rich people are greedy. That's more the left-wing position. Right-wing position is more, are you doing your part? Family responsibility? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? That's kind of the tension. But I just want to have a healthy conversation. Let's just have a healthy conversation. I want to acknowledge both sides, that there is substance in both ideas. Now, let's talk about the homeless and the unhoused. I had an individual write me a letter after a church service, and it was very insightful. It was almost in the same week that someone told me, he said, hey, there's a ministry, there's a group that's caring for the poor, and they're not doing anything about the drug problem. But then the other person was trying to tell me, hey, you know, the reason a lot of people are on drugs on the streets is because living outside is so hard, they're trying to numb themselves to the pain. It's like this deep, deep death cycle. So where do we go from here when you have the tension of both? Drug addiction is real. It's a real problem. Lee, you were talking about the stress of this. I want to build out the stress of it just a little while longer. I want to listen to both sides of the argument because I do believe that there are direct responses to poverty for us all. But when we talk about rising inflation, now we're talking about everybody's wallet. Stress in society has gone up. I'm watching these kids loot, which I just think is criminal, and break into stores. And now it's like, I don't think this group fits this category, but the Bible judges a person who steals because they're hungry different than a person, who is just violating a law. It's very interesting. But earlier you were talking about just the stress of the situation of finances. Can you jump back into that for a second for us?
Yeah. When I think about the way our podcast is structured, it's really idyllic, and the way that every teacher wants their class to be. You take turns speaking. It was all I could do not to be the kid that I used to be and just jump in there and say, what are you saying? Because money is so important. And when you have it, you can downplay it. When you don't have it, it's a whole different ballgame. It's hard to think about what a headache feels like when you don't have one. It's hard to think what a toothache. I mean, we just kind of like, oh man, you got a toothache. I'm sorry. But when you get one, good Google Mooka, you want some mercy, you want some grace, you want the whole world to stop and say, hey, what can we do to help you with your tooth? And I've been proximate to too many people like that I suffer with them vicariously. The working poor is an issue. Just look at it. People working 2 and 3 jobs. They did all they knew to do. Yeah. Some of us were blessed. From what I know, the 4 of us were blessed with the homes that we grew up in. Somebody said, do the right thing, go to school. If you don't, I'm going to deal with you, learn, whatever. Everybody didn't get that.
That's right.
And so to be merciful towards the working poor, I have encountered, I'm too proximate to too many people that don't have any gas. They can't put gas in that mom that can't get across town. And I think there are things that we could do. Yes, America, we believe in, capitalism and all this stuff. But I think there's some way that we need to look and evaluate and assess the situation, saying, okay, America compared to other countries, when we could have the level of poverty that we have compared to other countries, we don't have to go to communism and all this kind of stuff. But I think we do need to reevaluate this whole thing of greed and how we allow our neighbors to suffer. We say that we are a God-fearing country as a rule, whether or not you believe in this or that, but that's what we say we are. And I think there are ways that we could address this, and I think none of us have all the answers, but I have a portion of an answer, and that is to make the people that we elect as public officials tell them that part of your responsibility is to love our community. And I think they will do as directed. They will do. They will respond to our demands. But what right now they're responding to us that says, "Hey, look after me." And I think we are. I've taught this, preached this all my life. Is that we were born selfish. And so I don't know who's got the youngest child in the room, but they came into this world selfish. They wanted a toy that the other person went and picked up. And what I will suggest, and we can debate this at a later time, but you never get over selfishness. You never get over it. I like Scotia, I don't want to make everybody believe like I believe, but this is just my Lee Rowland opinion. With God, you learn to manage it, but you never conquer it. And I think if we can work on our selfishness and looking at how our neighbor is living, and it affects our votes, it affects our actions, it affects how we contribute. But I have seen too many people that can't put gas in that car. My personal experience of my situation changing a little bit and then going to the store and making purchases and things like that. And I'm like, wow, I was able to do it. It was rough or whatever. I don't know how people are doing, making decisions when they've done everything right. They put some stuff in the savings, they worked hard, and then that rug gets snatched out from under them. And it's happening every day in America.
It is.
Yeah. We've got, you say what you will or may, but we've got several groups as we speak that are on strike right now. And these are professionals. These are people that they've got training. They did things right. And they're saying, I can't live. I can't live. I don't believe all of that's selfish. People just making bad decisions. I think these people are saying, I am in a working class and I can't afford to live.
I'm with you, Lee.
And we need to look at
you're like absolutely right. I'm going to keep going back to our listeners. Our invitation, the Dream Together podcast, is an invitation to say, I know what your algorithms are telling you. You're either all on the left and you're like just, right-wingers, stop being so greedy, give some more money and government pour money that way. And the right-wingers are saying to the left-wingers, hey, stop giving all of this government tax money away and stop. I mean, you've got these polarized positions. We want to just create an opportunity to let's just build on some concepts that there's the absolute polarized positions. I think they take both truths too far. Okay, can we talk about the fact that we do have the situation where if you give that person cash, they're going around the corner and they're not putting it in a savings account, and they did use it on drugs. Yes, that's there. We also have Lisa that me and my kids picked up because we were on our way just to kind of chill on a Saturday, and I'm going to take them fishing. Let them fish while I sit there and enjoy nothing blowing in one ear and out the other. And hearing the whistle sound in the middle. Lisa's taking her little suitcase, and she's about early 60s. She's walking away from Norman, and I'm looking at her, and we drive past her, and, you know, we've got an open Saturday in front of us, and I'm like, where is she going? There's nothing past 24th but a big lake, and that is blocks away. And by the time you realize you're going in the wrong direction, you're going to be tired and exhausted and probably have no water, and there's not going to be hardly any homes in that space. So we stopped and we talked to Lisa. Long story short, feel very safe because I am cautious about who I put in my vehicle, et cetera. My children are with me. I did have a friend whose best friend was shot because he picked up somebody he did not know and literally got murdered.
Oh, man.
So you got all that going on. Who is this? She gets in our vehicle and she's talking to the kids like any other grandmother. If you didn't know that we didn't know this lady, you wouldn't have known she was homeless. You wouldn't have known that she was in a situation. If you would have just heard her voice and heard the conversation in the car, she wasn't asking for anything. I had to offer to try to get her to a space where she would be able to eat in her next meal. She said, well, I was paying $400 a month in my efficiency. Mm-hmm. I'm on a fixed income. They raised the prices. I've been on the street for 7 months. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. My family doesn't have room for me. I don't want to be a burden to anybody. I hopefully can get off the street soon. I just want to invite us, because I'm going to ask John Mark to take us back out to some of these ideas about capitalism, because every system I've seen, my notes are, there are systems, I believe, that have more opportunity and they facilitate human sin more, seemingly. Mm-hmm. And John Mark will break it down for us in just a second. But I want to keep just the stories there. Mm-hmm. Because it's like everybody wants a palace on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm. Well, Clarence, here's what I want to say
Help me, John Mark,
before I even think about
just keep going.
Capitalism. I want to thank Brother Lee, for breathing a little prophetic fire into our conversation that was a little too comfortable and a little too calm.
Especially on such a hard topic. And I think much more important than trying to have nuanced definitions here is saying there's people around us who are hurting. Yeah. There's people around us who are hurting. And God has compassion. I mean, if you're listening to this and you're in that situation, Jesus said, I came to preach good news to the poor. He didn't say I came to preach good news to the middle class about how they should be compassionate to the poor. True. He said, I came to preach good news to the poor. God loves you. He has compassion for you. But he does say to those who have more resources, if you're going to follow me, you need to join me in radical generosity to the poor. I mean, you can't get around Luke 12:33, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide for yourselves money bags that do not grow old, treasure in heavens that does not fade. So there's a call for any Christian, for the church. If you don't have resources, God loves you. He cares for you in the midst of your pain. If you do have resources, be ready to give them away in order to enter into the pain of others. And if we're going to talk about how do we deal with that practically, I would just love to throw a few thoughts out about that, if that's okay, Clarence.
I want you to. I want us to have a space where we can talk about this, because someone's asking, Did you just say that no one's supposed to be wealthy? Did you just say that we're not supposed to have money? So please keep going.
I just quoted Jesus over there in Luke 12:33.
Please,
you can look it up in your Bible.
Please keep going. Please keep going.
Okay, so here's what I would say.
Our words tell us what to think.
We can think about, how do I solve the poverty problem? I mean, I would love to eradicate poverty. Wouldn't you love to eradicate poverty? If I had an eradication of poverty wand, I would love to do that. And we could talk about what's the best macroeconomic system to try to do that. But what I would love to talk about is just boots on the ground. If there's Christians or churches that are engaging in this conversation, I have hurting neighbors around. Maybe I am hurting because of poverty, or I have hurting neighbors all around me. What should I do? And I think there are some really practical things that we could say. I have been very influenced with the philosophy of ministry about this by John Perkins, who I quoted in our last episode too. But he talks about a response from the church. Jesus calls us to radical generosity. Give to everyone who asks from you. That's just one of those radical statements. Jesus says every time a pastor tries to preach that text, what am I going to give to everyone who asks from you? The need is overwhelming all around us. But John Perkins talks about how in our context, so we do live in America, we do live in a capitalist society, et cetera, how in our context ought we to live that out? And his response, it involves relief, but it also says, let's go beyond relief to development. So let me explain what that means. Relief means, in my church, in my context right now, I'm thinking of two people that are battling exactly what you were talking about, Scotia. They are aging people and living in abject poverty, and we deal with this all the time, but there's just two right now, actually three right now, that are close members of our family that it is so painful, dying of renal failure and can't get to dialysis treatment, living on Section 8 and still can't make ends meet. But if I go into this assisted living place down the street, I know that there's not high quality care. People are not treated with dignity there. And as the church, how do we come around and give rides and get on the phone and advocate? And we've had church members bring folks into their home to live with them in that situation. That's that level of, here's acute pain right now. We need to bring relief. And it could be, again, we don't have food on the table. Let's get you that food on the table. But moving beyond that to development is asking the question, how can we be a part of breaking cycles of generational poverties in this neighborhood? And that's going to have to do with education. We need to fight to get good schools for these kids, because you're not going to be able to break a cycle of generational poverty if the kids are going to schools that are failing. So at the policy level, we advocate towards that end. At the service level, we show up in the schools and work towards that. That's going to have to do with mentoring, because we all need mentors. That's going to have to do with healthcare. People need access to high quality healthcare, because I can't work a job and hold down a job if I'm just sick all the time and can't get what I need. It's going to have to do with addiction care, because in urban poverty in America, we are very vulnerable to addiction, and casting condemnation on people who, that has gotten its hooks in them is not going to get us anywhere. It's also, I think, has to do with asking questions about ownership. One of the things John Perkins said when he was describing to churches, even back in the 70s, when he was describing to churches how they can deal with poverty, he used the word redistribution to intentionally provoke people. We knew you were a communist, but he said, I'm not talking about taking all the money from the rich people and giving it to the poor people. Because if we do that, the rich people are going to have it again tomorrow. What do you mean? Well, the poor people are going to go buy Mercedes, and the rich people still own the Mercedes lot. So tomorrow, poor people are poor with the Mercedes, and rich people are rich again. But what he was saying is, can we create jobs that are owned by this community in this community? Right. And there's been great places. I mean, John Perkins did it in Mendenhall. Wayne Gordon, following that model, did it in Lawndale and in the Chicago area. But thinking through, how can we, within an impoverished community, try to redistribute that ownership, where we're making resources available to local people to own business, to own land in a way that can actually bring an end to some of these cycles of poverty. Okay, I'll stop talking now, because I've been rambling. I'm ranting for a minute there.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's where we want to go. And let's ask a question here. Part of the political tension is around where the money comes from. Because one group will say, well, we need to access to healthcare. So that means everyone should have a healthcare program that's sponsored by the government. Mm-hmm. The other argument against that says, well, that's not the government's responsibility to do that. Mm-hmm. our conversation is talking about the church and the city. So y'all enjoy your arguments. I'm saying before the church, are there creative solutions that the church might need to think through going into the future around health care? You know, yes, healthcare, it's a big deal. It affects lifespans, et cetera. But just to kind of circle that one, I think that's probably one of the biggest politically polarized points. That is healthcare an issue? I think everyone would land to say yes. Who should carry it, I think, is another challenge. But now let's just zero in on the church and the city. With the conditions the way they are right now, how does the church respond? Someone might say, well, we need to influence policy. Okay, no. I'm just saying, let's say this, let's just, with the church, what should the church do just outside of politics in the health conversation? Because we're in the spaces where people are struggling.
I would love to talk about the church and the health conversation, but it looked like you jumped in first, brother.
I'll let you finish. I would ask our listeners to be mindful, if they don't know, that we do have nonprofits. We do have just a plethora of ways that the church could help be an answer to these solutions when people can't. One of the things I want people to do, and I'll hand it over to John Mark, is I've long said that if you don't subscribe to this idea that I am my neighbor's brother's keeper,
right?
If you don't subscribe to that, I'm not saying you're a terrible person. You know, if you believe a man ought to pull himself up by his bootstraps and all that, I do understand that, and not going to say that you're wrong. I would ask people, when I speak, I ask them to consider, though, this thought that the life you save by helping your brother or sister might be your own, because we don't want that futuristic society that we saw Alfred Hitchcock or Twilight Zone, where we have all of these people that are kind of now, living dead, all of these people coming after us. What if everybody had a chance to live, to thrive, or more people had a chance to live and thrive? Wouldn't that be beneficial to all of us? You don't have to believe you're your brother's keeper, but I think you might be keeping yourself. If we looked at, considered how to love, how to contribute, and they're showing us somebody's asking us to help every day.
Yeah.
And we can't, none of us can help all of those organizations. I don't believe we have to do that to be a Christian now.
Yeah.
We ought to be thinking where I can.
Yeah.
And there's somewhere that you can, and who knows what difference that makes if Lee mentors one child.
See that now that's where I wanted to personally drive in. I'm not here to pick on these. I really love John Mark. You've studied a lot of this. Proximity to me is one of the big invitations, and you said to mentor. What I think about is the story of the Good Samaritan. There was a healthcare issue. You're laying half dead, bandaging wounds, right? That's a healthcare issue, but there was a proximity situation where regardless of whatever the Jewish or the Roman government was thinking at that time, or if Samaria had their own government, I don't know. In that moment, an individual stepped up to care physically. And it wasn't just, hey, I'm driving past you and I'm handing $20 out the door or $1 out the door to someone who's in a situation of need. But when I think about this, on both sides of the political aisle, the thing that I think distorts both positions is proximity.
Yes.
Yes, I know you want everyone to have health care. And I agree with you. I want everyone to be cared for and healthy. Mm-hmm. Now, do I think there's a conversation about who's responsible? That's why I can't wait to hear what John Mark's about to say. Should it come from somebody else's taxes, from the government, or should the church rise up in those areas? I'm talking about even with the individuals. There's something about proximity. One thing I love, well, let me pick on the right-wingers too. So then you have the right-winger who says, hey, then it was their fault, their family fell apart, then you should have stayed married, then you shouldn't have left your house, and it's wholeness in family, and now you're suffering the consequences. But still, I love it that a president, before he has the freedom and the liberty to start wars, I need you standing by that plane when those coffins come home, and I need you to look those mothers and fathers in the eye. And governors and mayors, I need you to not just be, forgive me for being too brutal on this, because I could do it too in any position, or pastors don't just hobnob with the rich members and the ones that can pay your tithe or pay your salary with their tithes. They have needs too, and they're great people too. But I think there's an imbalance in proximity if you don't know the name of one homeless person in your city or one poor person. There's a proximity issue around all of this. Okay, John Mark.
Well, I'm going to touch on a couple things you just said. So on the healthcare, I'll say I'm encouraged by some examples in Oklahoma City. So when we moved into South OKC, as you alluded to earlier, we're in an area where the zip codes in our community tend to have about a 17-year shorter lifespan projected than those in other zip codes further north of us. Mm-hmm. And that data point represents a lot of pain. And some of it, I was just describing how we see it impacting those who are aged, although honestly, many of those people I'm talking about aren't that old. They may be in their 50s or 60s, but they already have, very severe aging problems, but it's not really an aging problem. There's a lifetime of stuff that is beat up on their bodies. But we can see the beginning of that very young. Kids that were healthy a few years ago that now they're overweight, and you can see the type 2 diabetes coming, not because of some sin of gluttony or something, but because the only way in this situation of single mom and low-income household, the only way we're eating is to walk to the corner store in this food desert and buy Frito-Lay products,
Right.
So we had a physician, Dr. Reed Hebert, in our church who started partnering with somebody who's doing their master's in public health to do a lot of research about what are the liabilities and the assets in terms of public health in this neighborhood and gather a lot of data. And then he worked 3 days a week at OU Children's Hospital so he could spend the other 2 days a week starting and leading a nonprofit to figure out how can we bring solutions.
Brilliant.
And had at the core of that, we want to provide a high quality medical home for everybody in this community, because almost nobody has a medical home. Is a technical term, meaning I got a primary care physician who's helping me avoid illness. I'm not just going to the ER when I'm very sick, which, by the way, those ERs spend millions of dollars on those patients. So there's a big economic reason to invest in those kinds of clinics that are proximate.
Well, 7 years ago, it was $320 a visit, and the big healthcare conversation was, how can we redirect them to ongoing PCP care?
So Dr. Hebert is saying, how can we provide a high-quality medical home for everybody in this community, both the uninsured and those who are on Sooner Care or other similar government programs, but that don't have a primary care physician for a lot of cultural reasons. But also, how can we do public health education and advocacy, free screenings, connecting people to existing resources that are already there, but the bureaucracy is very difficult to navigate? How can we develop leaders, both at the medical school and within the community, people that are graduating from local high schools and going to Oklahoma City Community College to get their nursing degree, to see that vocation as an opportunity to serve the most vulnerable in our community? And eventually he started Hilltop Clinic and started a lot of other things that is really having a significant impact in the neighborhood, moving the needle. But yesterday I was having lunch where Scotia's family lives and works at Shiloh Adventure Camp with a group of leaders that's starting a new cooperative, Oklahoma Charitable Clinics Cooperative, to try and bring together people who are doing similar work in other parts of the city. Say, how do we work together to look at systemic issues so we're not just having a positive impact in one neighborhood, but across the city? And how do we partner with some of those hospitals who are trying hard to address these issues, but they don't have the proximity to really get at the root cause? And, so those kinds of things are really encouraging to me. And the last thing I'll add on that, here's John Mark's 2 cents. This is not thus saith the Lord, and probably not even thus saith everybody on the Dream Together podcast. But what John Mark's 2 cents is, we need to work on those grassroots entrepreneurial type solutions, and God's people need to be doing public policy advocacy. I think it's both and. Now, my caveat on that second is I have convictions about what public policies would help, and you may hear them from me in the opinion page or on the news or whatever, but if you disagree, that's okay.
Yeah.
As long as we're saying we're trying to figure out what policies are going to help the most vulnerable.
That's it.
And if we disagree on the particularities of what's going to be helpful in this situation, that's okay. But I found that very often I've been wrong about those issues because I've only been looking at them in theory until either I got proximate or I really listened to some people who were proximate. So coming back to that issue of proximity, if we're saying, okay, we want to do advocacy, but what policies would actually help with education? Well, Lee probably has some good ideas because he's been proximate to that issue for a while.
That's it.
So let's, as a church, let's have the humility. We can still agree to disagree at the end of the day about some issues, but let's have the humility to really listen to those servants who have been proximate to people directly affected by this issue. See if we can glean some wisdom from them about what policies would be helpful about a given issue.
And empower them to become the peacemakers that they already are, to bring support around those folks as well. Because when we talk about proximity, like some people don't know, how to get into proximity. The worlds that we come from are so vastly different.
Oh my goodness.
And so there are these folks who have been, who are the peacemakers or the ones who are bridgers in a community, and we need to put support around those people because it's a very lonely job, and you all know it because you are it. But to bring people together from different worlds so that there can be the sharing of stories, the finding of our common ground, and then figuring out how we can work together toward the city that we all want. I think everybody wants that for a city where everyone can flourish. We don't all know how to get there, but there are plenty of statistics and studies and stories that tell us that we are more likely to get there when we're doing it together versus in our silo. So if we are only hearing people saying what we think, then we are not going to get toward a solution.
Amen,
we have to be
sister.
walking next to people who
Amen.
think differently, who don't agree on everything, who do it differently. And yet we found enough agreement to move forward together on something. And so, let's empower those peacemakers. Let's support them. Let's encourage them. Let's send them those texts of encouragement because it is lonely and it is unpopular at times. And sometimes both sides that you're trying to bring together are mad at you.
Yes.
So let's put support around those folks because they are the ones who are actually mending the torn spaces in our communities.
That's right. You all have said so many rich things. I want to put a challenge out there that if you are trying to be a bridge builder, there may be seasons where you're misunderstood, and because of our political context right now, if you've made it this far in this podcast, you probably had to choose to keep listening because you probably said, oh, they're about to go down this road, or they're about to go down another road. They're about to go down another road. Our goal of this podcast is we are battling for the table where we can get those who are proximate in these conversations to deal with the details that make a difference. I remember hearing Dr. King talk about the man beaten on the road and left for dead, and the classic phrase, the Good Samaritan. He was talking about, well, why don't we just build a better road because the Jericho road had so many sharp corners. It was easy for thieves to get their job done. And he was like, sometimes you need to work on the whole system. Getting proximate people to have a conversation is a challenge. getting two different groups from the left wing and the right wing who simply care about it. Can we just put policy, that part down? I just want to challenge anyone who's listening that before you throw away someone who's willing to sacrifice, that's the term I want you to look for. Who's sacrificing? Don't be too quick to throw them away, because right now most people only have one or two buckets to choose from when it comes to bringing solutions. Because the people that lose are the ones who need us the most. Most of us that are fussing back and forth might be okay even with these rising prices. So I just want to challenge everybody. That's what the Dream Clock is all about, is to let's push these conversations out. There's 1,000 other things we could talk about, but I'm so glad that we're able just to have a conversation around loving and caring for others. I'll end with this. You know, my son was laying there, and I was so thankful that he was sitting watching a YouTube video that normally a teenager would call boring. But we were watching a video clip on how they were handling the homeless and the unhoused in Hawaii. And I was just glad to see a teenager locked in on a conversation. Mm-hmm. And boy, I just had to zip my lips, because as a parent, I wanted to just examine every thought that went through his head. But it felt like one of those moments that it was like, hey, don't go overbearing parent on them in this moment now. I think it's dangerous for us to not be proximate to pain. Mm-hmm. I agree. Mm-hmm. And I think if we have a consensus at this table, it's definitely an invitation to say, if you have an idea about how school policy should change, I want to challenge you to know the names of a child who is in a difficult situation at home. Mm-hmm. If you have an opinion about how the city or the nation should handle poverty and homelessness, I want to challenge you to learn the story and the name of someone who is trapped in it. Mm-hmm. Before you just hand the $20 bill out the window, maybe you challenge you, take them to lunch and sit with them and eat, or grab a meal and go sit next to them on the side of the road and ask them their names. You know, before we talk about what the next healthcare policy is, I don't know which side you'll land on, but I just want to challenge you with the proximity challenge. Hear their whole story. When you sit with them, look at their foot. Is it red and swollen? And don't be afraid to ask about it, because we know if you ask about it, then we're responsible. But I'm just going to challenge you. I think we're too free on both sides to scream about policy without being connected to pain. Thank you so much for being with us. I know we take you deep on the Dream Together podcast, but that's why we're here. We're here because we're not calling everybody evil. We're just recognizing that, like Lee said, we can be inherently selfish. I don't want my children to grow up and not realize that we could be the rich man inside the house that Jesus warned us about, who just keeps walking past those who need us. Let's figure it out together. Thanks for joining us.